to work to get everybody trained to start on time. So welcome to our car forums. I want to start too by apologizing because sometimes I get my dates mixed up. And for some reason, I scheduled a training during our Culture Breakfast Club meeting and then didn't have a training last week, which I thought was when the Culture Breakfast Club was. So anyways, I apologize for that mishap. We're going to pay closer attention to that in the future. But that being said, also coming up in November, which is coming up here pretty quick, we are going to do some days of business planning. So stay tuned for that release of dates. I think Abby has those, so maybe she'll throw them in the chat box for me. And then we're going to focus our main trainings through the month of November on tech, how to use it. We've had some questions as far as like, how do we send out like neighborhood reports for our database and some different things like that. So we're going to dive into that. If there's anything that you want me to cover with regards to tech, throw those in the message box, shoot me over a text message, put them in the foxhole, whatever works. Reach out to me some way, somehow, so that I can make sure to get those on the calendar. We're going to continue our Thursday morning, same time, trainings at 9 o'clock, moving through November. We will not have one on the third week of, well, there's a couple times that we won't have one because we're not going to have any training on Thanksgiving. Whether you choose to celebrate that or not, I'm not going to host a training on Thanksgiving Day. So we won't have one then. And if that's not the third week, then we also don't have one on the third week. So let me look at the calendar real quick here. That's not what I wanted to do. October, November. So we'll have a training on the 6th, the 13th, and then we won't have a training on the 20th or the 27th. And then we're going to come back into December with a special series. I normally do like a 12 days of something type training through the month of December. So we'll specify which days that's going to be. Oftentimes I try to do it between Christmas and New Year's. Gives you guys something to do to start the year strong. We're going to do it earlier in the month this year. Mainly because I've got jury duty from the 15th to the 19th of December. So we're just going to work around that, throw it earlier in the month, and then we'll have those weeks off between Christmas and New Year's, planning to start New Year's strong. If you're like, Amy, why are you doing business planning at the beginning of November? Because ultimately we should have done it in October. We should always have our plan in place for the next year going into the final months of the year, because going into this final quarter, because we want to have a plan in place. We want to be working that plan before January hits so that we can have the closings coming that we're hoping to have or that we're planning to have in January. If we don't put our business plan together until January, then what happens is we don't start working it until January, maybe February at the earliest, and then we're already behind. So we want you guys to start out ahead. So pay attention, watch for that business planning. We'll talk about how to set up your plan for 2026, the types of activities that you should be doing, what you should be seeing on your calendar. So we'll talk about that. So let's go ahead and dive into our car forms training, which usually occupies the last Thursday of the month. So if you guys want to throw that on your calendars, if you don't normally tune into our trainings, but you want the car forms, it's usually the last Thursday of the month. So that being said, I should have my screen shared. We're going to talk about the contingencies. Okay. There was also a question on the thing about how to do double-ended transactions. You're going to find me very rarely, like probably never, teach on double-ending transactions. And the reason for that is that even though we legally can double end transactions, there's a very few instances where I would recommend doing it. Now, keep in mind that it is going to be dual agency if you are representing the buyer and I'm representing the seller, because we're from the same office. So that is still dual agency, but there's that degree of separation. You're watching out for the buyer's best interest. I'm watching out for the seller's best interest. And you're going to see here why I say that as we work through these contingency forms. There's just so much gray area when you're representing both parties. I think it's almost impossible to take care of the interests of both parties. Thank you, Michelle. It's tough to put on two hats. Yeah, it's the way that you work with a buyer is completely opposite of the way that you work with a seller. And to try to run both of those roles in the same transaction is so incredibly difficult. If you're going to have like legal issues, my theory is that they're going to come up from dual agency transactions. Now, that being said, I did say there's some areas where I would say it's okay. One is you've got family members that are transferring property from one to the other, and they want an agent involved in that transaction just to help facilitate, make sure all the paperwork's in order, whatever that is, then that's fine. The other time that I've done it is when we've got like a tenant purchasing the property that they've been living in for multiple years from a seller or from the owner of the property, because the tenant oftentimes knows more about that property than the seller does. So those two type situations, I would say, yeah, you could probably get away with dual agency. Other than that, I would take that buyer or that seller, whoever it is, refer it. Usually when you're dual agency, you have the listing and then a buyer comes in and wants to purchase it. So I would refer that buyer to another agent in our office for that purchase only, put that referral agreement in place. Because what that does is that just adds that degree of separation. Collect a referral fee from that buyer if they do purchase that property. If they don't purchase the property that you're listing, take them back as your buyer, go show them properties, find them the right match. Okay. That would be my opinion on dual agency, which is why we don't teach on it very often, if ever. Okay. I want you guys to feel like it's elusive and that you don't know what you're doing so that you don't do it. All right. So let's dive in. So we have the contingency for the sale of the buyer's property. This is our COP form, our COP form. This is used when we have a buyer getting ready to make an offer on a property, and it's contingent for whatever reason on the sale of that property. Now, this could be that it's contingent on the sale of that property because the lender's requiring the buyer to sell that property before they can close on the purchase. Okay, that's the number one reason we see this. But sometimes we see well-qualified buyers that technically could keep that property, purchase another one. They don't have to sell it. The lender's not requiring it, but our buyer doesn't want to have two mortgages. And so they want that property sold so that they can do the purchase forward. Or even though they have money in savings, they would rather use the equity from that sale to do the purchase forward. Now, there are loan programs out there to help facilitate that. It does not get rid of the second mortgage. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It's one thing in like a super hot market where we're doing those bridge loan programs, because we know that the second we put a property on the market, it's going to sell, and maybe our buyers don't want to show the property and they're trying to, prepare for their purchase forward. So they don't want it sold prior to them moving out of it. So there's lots of reasons that we would not put a property on the market. Those bridge loans are great. In a slower market, right? A property could sit on the market for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, depending on where the property is located, what it's got going for it, what it doesn't have going for it, right? So the property could be sitting there, and if your buyers don't want to handle that mortgage, they may not have to sell that property, but they would like to have it either in contract or sold prior to the close of escrow of the property they're purchasing. Then we would use this form for that as well. So either lender required sale or just, hey, the buyer would like to have that property under contract or sold. So that's the contingency for the sale of the buyer's property. It's an addendum to the purchase agreement. We always want to submit this with the purchase agreement. There's a box that we'll check on the purchase agreement. In fact, maybe we should pull that up just so you can see where that is at in case you've never dealt with this form before. Oftentimes when the market's hot, we try to eliminate this form because, if the seller has the option of selecting a contingent sale versus a non-contingent sale, meaning when we say it that way, it's contingent on the sale of a property by the buyer, then it says it's in there. I don't know why. All right, close. Let's try this again. Where is it? There we go. All right. So So oftentimes we try to eliminate this in a hot market because the seller is going to choose somebody who's not contingent on selling a property because this is basically makes a domino. Okay. And we as listing agents, we don't like dominoes. Okay. So if we look, oh, I added the wrong one. Let's try this again. Eventually I'll get the right form added. So I can show you where this contingency is in your block of contingencies, just so you're familiar with it. All right, let's see here. California residential purchase agreement. Keep in mind too that in December, while I'm getting this pulled up, our forms are going to update. They update every June and every December. So we will also have a training covering the changes to the forms. For some reason today, my scrolling is unhappy. Oh, it's because I'm just paused. So let's see if we can get this working. There we go. All right, we're just scrolling down here to the purchase agreement. So I'm scrolling through all of the forms at the beginning. Oh, because I'm on the wrong form. It bounced back up. Give me 2 seconds here. All right, now we're on the right track. All right, so in our block on the purchase agreement, we have section L, which is all of our contingencies. So in case you're like, want to know where the contingencies are, they're all in 3L. Down here at the bottom, L9 is the sale of the buyer's property. For this form to be included as part of our contract, make sure you check that box. Otherwise, even if you submit it over, if this box is not checked and our sellers sign that they accept the offer, it's not actually contingent per the contract on the sale of the buyer's property. So please make sure you check that box. The other thing we want to be certain of is once we have this included as part of our purchase, we don't want to remove all of our contingencies because if we do what we normally do on transactions for our buyers and check the box for a buyer hereby removes all contingencies, they just check that box at the end, send it on its way, right? Then if the property hasn't closed, you've removed this contingency. And if something happens and this sale falls out of escrow that the buyer for the buyer's property, then your buyer is out of luck. They're going to lose their deposit. They're going to be in breach of contract if they have to cancel the contract. So keep those two things in mind. All right, so it's an addendum to the purchase agreement. We just saw where to check that box. Make sure you're going to put the date here that's on the date in the upper left-hand corner of the first page of that purchase agreement. Oftentimes we're filling these out on the same day, so it'd be like today's date. All right, you're going to put in the buyer's names here. My buyer has a unique name of buyer one. That's their first and last name. And then on the next line, you always want to put in the seller's names. Okay, and then we want to put here, this is where the buyer's property address is going to go. Buyer Street. Okay, so you're going to put the property the buyer is going to sell goes there. Okay, so that's how we fill out the top section. Section 1 is the buyer's property contingency. You have a couple of options here. The default is 1A, which is buyer entering into a contract for the sale of and closing escrow on the buyer's property. So not only is that makes there two contingencies as part of this form. The first one being it's contingent on entering into contract, so actually finding a buyer for that property. The second half is closing escrow, that buyer actually has to close escrow. That's the ideal option for a buyer. Okay. B, so if we check the box for 1B, it's going to be only contingent. There's only one contingency on entering into contract for the sale of the buyer's property. Again, if your buyers don't have to sell their property, they just may want their property under contract before they close escrow on the replacement property. So lots of options there, but that would be that one. It's not contingent on the close of escrow of the property they're selling. If we check box C, 1C, then it's contingent only on the close of escrow of the buyer's property. So we're assuming that the property is already in contract, which is the next part of this. It's saying, hey, it's only contingent on the close of escrow. The property is already in escrow with, and we're going to put here the escrow company. So it'd be like, we're going to go Chicago today. Title company. Okay. And then you would put in the escrow number here. Okay. And the contractual close of escrow date. Okay. If we're already in contract, we know when it should be closing. Okay. So that would be box C, a copy of the contract for sale of the buyer's property and the contact information and escrow number for that sale, escrow evidence, is attached to the COP form or will be delivered to seller within 2 days after acceptance, or we could shorten that to 1. So if the default is we're attaching it to this form. I don't know why you wouldn't want to attach it to the form. Is my screen going in and out, Iris? Let me try stopping my share and then I'll re-share in case that's doing it for everybody. So anyways, so we would want to make sure that we fill in a line there if you're not going to deliver it with. Now, I get this question all the time of, hey, Amy, I've got a contingency for the sale of the buyer's property in place. And the listing agent's asking me for a copy of that contract. Why would they ask for that? And do I have to give them that? Absolutely, yes. They're asking it because they want to know the terms of the contract that you've accepted on that buyer's property. And that's considered escrow evidence, which right here under 1C, and we'll see it again later in this form, that's required to be passed on to the listing agent and the seller of the property we're making an offer on. All right, so those are your options. Notice it's either 1A or B or C. There's no and. So you got to select, it's either contingent on both entering into contract and sale, or only entering into contract, or only the close of escrow, assuming it's already in contract. Okay, those are your 3 options for 1A. Again, most of the time, we make it contingent on both entering into contract and sale, or our close of escrow, or just close of escrow if it's already in contract. Your offer is a lot stronger if your buyer's property is already in escrow. So slow market, it doesn't matter quite as much, okay, when we're waiting for offers to come in. But when you've got multiple offers, properties are going pretty quick. It's advisable to have your buyer get their property on the market first, get it into contract. We're going to make it contingent on the seller's purchase of replacement property, which we'll talk about here in a little minute. And then once that property is in escrow, then we make offers on properties that we want to move forward with. The other option too is that we close escrow on the buyer's property. Buyer negotiates either like a rent back, right? A seller in possession after the close of escrow, or residential lease after sale type contract, or your seller slash buyer has a property they can move into temporarily while they look and find another property. So those are all options as well. Again, with a slower market, it's not as necessary as if we've got like a super hot market where we're trying to eliminate this form. Any questions about section 1?
Amy, I have a question about option B.
Yeah.
The ones I've done have all been A, but have you ever had a seller counter back and say that you have to choose B? And then for me, I would not choose that one, especially if my client didn't needed to sell their home. But have you ever had them come back, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, so I've never had anybody counter me on only entering into contract for sale of buyer's property, thankfully. If somebody did, if an agent countered me back on that, I would probably have a conversation with them on the phone, right? That's when we're going to pick up the phone and have a conversation and be like, hey, like, it's really important. We actually can't, entering into contract is great. And I know that it puts your sellers at risk, but we're not going to move forward with the purchase if we can't, it's not both entering into contract and close of escrow. Sorry, I apologize for that. But my buyers just aren't willing to put themselves at risk in case the buyers on their property cancel.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that
I
makes
would
sense because
probably
that seems so risky.
say that again.
I said that makes sense because option B seems so risky.
Yeah, or maybe if we put in a low deposit, my buyers are okay losing that deposit, then maybe I would throw that in there and be like, okay, that's fine, because we could still cancel, right? Buyer's property enters into escrow, those buyers cancel. Moving forward, my buyers could ask for an extension of time to start this process over to get their property back in contract. Sellers don't give them that, then they could cancel, but they are going to be in breach of contract. So more than likely we can't advise whether they're actually going to lose their deposit or not, but more than likely they're going to lose their deposit because they'll be in breach. But if it's a small deposit, maybe they're willing to gamble that. But yeah, for the most part, if we need to close escrow, they're adamant on making sure we close escrow, then I would not. And in the same aspect, some people, right? There's like kind of some gray area here of, well, if we accepted it with only B marked entering in for contract, and then the buyers didn't fulfill their obligation by purchasing the property and they canceled, right? Then my buyers who are moving forward, well, they wouldn't have to cancel based on this. They no longer qualify for the loan because they don't have the down payment. So maybe we could cancel based on the loan contingency. Please don't do that. Don't play that game because um, that's what we used to do with the appraisals. And then they put it in the contract that we actually can't do that anymore. So you're going to pull the same red flag here if the sellers were to take the buyers to arbitration or mediation or small claims court over that deposit. If we tried to cancel based on the loan contingency because these buyers of their property didn't perform, chances are your buyers are going to lose their deposit. So don't play that game. Make sure it's very clear in here what we would be canceling based on. So yeah, I would counter back with a buyer counter offer for 1A.
Amy, what do you mean we can't do that with the appraisal?
Yeah, so back in the day, what we used to do is we would write that the property wasn't contingent on the appraisal. And then with the theory, I didn't actually do this, but agents did this all the time. They would write that there was no, because it was a hot market, that there was no appraisal contingency, banking on the fact that, well, if the appraisal didn't come in at value, the buyers didn't have the extra money to come in with funds to close escrow. So based on the fact that they wouldn't have the funds to close escrow for the gap between a low appraisal and the purchase price, then they couldn't qualify for the loan, so that we would cancel based on the loan contingency instead of the appraisal contingency.
I see.
The residential purchase agreement now specifically addresses that situation because agents were doing it so frequently. So I would assume that you're going to get the same pushback on this as well. Yeah. You know, back in the day, the Wild West. All right. So any other questions on section 1? Okay. Section 2 is buyers entering into contract for the sale of the buyer's property. So we only use section 2 if either 1A, the default, or 1B is checked. Okay. If we checked 1C, that it's only the close of escrow, we can just skip right over section B. Buyers shall have 17 days after acceptance to enter into contract for the sale of buyer's property. Okay, so that's how many days are we going to have for us to get an accepted offer. So we need to think about this really hard. Is the property already on the market? Is it going to take us a week to get it on the market? Are we putting it on the market tomorrow? Is it on the market and it's already been on the market 30 days and we don't have an accepted offer? What do we think is a realistic time frame in order to find a buyer get that property on the market and find a buyer for it? So be realistic here. Default is 17. We can put anything we want here. We can put 45 days. We could put 21 days. We could put 7 days here, right? So depending on whether it's a hot market or a slow market, right? A seller's market or a buyer's market, we might need to change this. If we think, man, we can have this property on the market in like 2 days, and I know we'll have multiple offers over the course of the first weekend, then we may want to shorten that time frame to make it more appealing for the seller to accept our offer over somebody else's offer. But in a buyer's market, a slower market, we may say, hey, we want 30 days, or we want 45 days after acceptance to get this into contract. Okay, so just be realistic there. There's nothing worse than having to come back and ask for more time. Wah, wah, wah. So that's A. Okay, 2B is by the earlier of the time specified in 2A, which is right here, the one that we just talked about, or within 2 days after buyer entering into contract for the sale of the buyer's property, buyer shall deliver escrow evidence to seller and escrow holder. Okay, what does that mean? That means that, hey, either by the end of this contingency time period on 2A, however many days we said it would take us to get into acceptance, or within 2 days after we actually accept an offer, which means that if we accept an offer on day 10, if we said, hey, we want 30 days, and on day 10 we get an offer and we accept it, within 2 days of accepting that offer, we're required contractually to let the seller know and deliver escrow evidence to the seller of the property we're purchasing forward to both escrow holder and seller. Okay, and remember, escrow evidence again is contact information for the escrow company and the escrow number along with the purchase agreement. Okay, any questions there on section 2?
For option 2B, are there any pros and cons for, sorry, for changing the date? I mean, not the date, the number of days?
Yeah, so the only time that I would change that is might shorten it. So if it was a hot market, I might say, hey, within 1 day after acceptance, you're going to get proof of escrow evidence versus within 2 days. The problem is sometimes we say 2 days because, like, if I accept it today and it's a Friday or let's say a Saturday, then, that gives me the weekend because we don't have escrow evidence until the escrow company's actually open. So it might take me a couple days to get that. So I think that's why the default is 2, but we may want to, I wouldn't ever lengthen it. There's really no reason to lengthen that time period. Why would we want to delay things out? Why would a seller want to accept an offer where we've delayed things out? That doesn't make sense. So I would either keep it 2 or shorten it if I was trying to be competitive. So, yeah.
Amy, is 45 days kind of the maximum number of days that you've seen on that on section 2A, or like in a slow market, or 60? What is a maximum number of days that you've seen on there in a
Yeah,
slow market?
absolutely. I mean, I think I've seen it's been a while since we've had a slow market, so I'm really having to rack my brain, but I think at one point I saw somebody put in 60 days. So, you can try whatever you feel like you need there. For a buyer or for a seller of a property, why would they accept an offer that's got a 60-day contingency there for the sale of the buyer's property? Well, if I'm the seller and my property's been sitting on the market for 30 days or 27 days or whatever that is, it's going to look better for me to put it into contract with a contingent go show, let people know we're accepting backup offers, than it is just to continue to let it sit out there and be active for another 60 days. So I'd rather roll my dice and say, hey, yeah, let's put this buyer in contract on this property. You're asking for 60 days to get your whatever, that's fine. But I'm going to continue to market the property, which you'll see here down in section 7. We'll kind of cover that portion of it. So yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily be afraid of that. It's going to look better to see that, oh yeah, we've got an accepted offer, not just that we've been sitting there. So for a seller, that's why they might accept a longer time period there. All right. Section 3 is listing and MLS status of buyer's property. So if 1A or B applies, so that's right, contingent on the entering into contract, A or B. Buyer has signed a listing agreement for buyer's property with or shall within 3 days. So the default is they've got a signed listing agreement, whether it's with you or another agent, whether their property's in another state or, local to where you're at, whatever that might be. Do they have a signed listing agreement with an agent? Okay, if they do, that's the default. We're going to put in the real estate brokerage here with which that listing agreement is signed with or who they're planning to sign with. Okay, so either, hey, yep, it's already signed, or we'll check this box here and how many days is it going to take us to get that listing agreement signed. Put in the brokerage here. Okay, so that's 3A. 3B, buyer's property is or will be submitted to the MLS in the geographical area where buyer's property is located, or buyer's property will not be submitted to the MLS in the geographical area where the buyer's property is located. That's important to a seller because if it's in the MLS, we know, especially in the geographical area where it's located, then we know that it's going to get more views, get in front of more potential buyers. So that's why that box is important. Buyer shall deliver to seller evidence of both the listing agreement and, if applicable, the MLS listing within 1 day after acceptance if buyer's property is already listed with a real estate brokerage, or if not already listed, within 1 day after listing with a real estate brokerage. Okay, so buyer shall deliver to seller evidence of the listing agreement and the MLS listing. Okay, so the report from the MLS showing that it's active in the MLS. Okay, if it's already listed, that's going to be a default of 1 day after acceptance. So sellers accept my offer on their property. They're going to show that here's proof of the listing agreement and here's proof that it is actually listed in the MLS, or after it goes live in the MLS. Okay, so either 1 day after acceptance or within 1 day after the listing is live. Okay. Now keep in mind here, if we check the box here that up in section 2, let's see. Sorry, that's a lie. Buyer has signed, a listing has signed, the buyer's property will be submitted to. Keep in mind that generally speaking, we assume that if the listing agreement is signed, that we're going on market within, 24 or 48 hours. So if we're not, we need to spell that out so that they know when that on market date is. Oftentimes, I include an addendum with this form. I do an addendum to the COP, and I outline all the highlights, the details. If my buyer's property is not yet on the market, when we're going to hit the market, when it's going to go live in the MLS, what the listing price is going to be, what the features are, what the current market looks like. I'm building a case of why and how we're going to get this property sold. Maybe what my marketing plan is if I'm the listing agent, or get that from the listing agent, of how we're going to get this property sold. Like, build your case for this property. There's not a lot of room to do this in this form, so oftentimes I do it in an addendum. All right, so that's 3, listing and MLS status of buyer's property. Close of escrow of buyer's property. Okay, if 1A or C applies, those are both the contingencies that have to do with the close of escrow. Buyer has until the following time to close escrow on the sale of buyer's property. Either the scheduled close of escrow of the seller's property, right? So it's got to close by the time we're going to close on this property, or if checked, no later than 5 days prior to the scheduled close of escrow of seller's property. Once buyer's property closes, buyer can no longer use this contingency to cancel this agreement. So this contingency removes automatically once it closes escrow. Just kind of keep that in mind. We still want to remove it in writing, but it does automatically remove. The default here of number 4 is that, hey, it just has to close by the time the scheduled close of escrow date of this property we're planning the purchase is. Okay. If we check this box, then it would be before the scheduled close of escrow. So if we're scheduled to close escrow on November 30th and we check this box, left it defaulted at 5, that would mean that we need to close escrow by the 25th of November. Okay, now keep in mind that if there's like a weekend or a holiday, because it rolls to the next business day, it probably needs to be before that because it says no later than 5 days. Okay, so keep that in mind. It could shorten it up. So you may want to look at what that time frame looks like. You could say, hey, it needs to close within 1 day of the scheduled close of escrow. Oftentimes, I just leave this at the default that, hey, we just want it to close by the scheduled close of escrow date. Okay, any questions about 3 or 4? All right, moving right along to 5. I do have the chat box open too in case you have questions. You can throw them in there. Feel free to interrupt me at any time too. The status of the sale of the buyer's property. So if 1A or C applies, broker agrees to keep seller informed about the status of the transaction for the sale of buyer's property, including any changes, modifications, addendums, or amendments to the terms of the accepted offer, or delays to or removals of contingencies. Say all those are updated. So we've got this property in contract now that the buyer's selling. Their buyers say, hey, we need an extension for the close of escrow, or hey, we are asking for these changes to the contract. All of those have to be kept up to date with the listing agent on the property we're purchasing. Okay. They have the right to be kept up to date on those updates. That's the status of the buyer's property. Within 2 days after seller's written request, but no earlier than the applicable time to remove contingencies in the contract for sale of the buyer's property, buyer shall deliver to seller evidence of the removal of those identified contingencies. So notice here, we don't have to automatically provide proof that the buyer of the property, the buyer's selling, I don't know, right? This gets really confusing, has removed those contingencies, but the seller can put in a written request for the status of those contingencies, and then we would have to provide that to them. If you were being a good, diligent agent, there's no reason why we wouldn't update the seller, assuming that our buyers removed their contingencies on time. We would let them know that, hey, the buyers removed this contingency, they've removed that contingency. Here's a copy of that contingency removal form, because that just lets the listing agent know of the property we're purchasing that, hey, that property's on track. We're moving forward. We're making progress. Okay. But we want to, anytime the seller makes a written request for any of those updates, we have to provide that to them. Cancellation of buyer's property. If the buyer's property is in or enters escrow and either party to that escrow gives the other a notice of cancellation of contract, buyer within 2 days thereafter shall deliver to seller a written notice of that cancellation, right? So we lose our buyers. We're contingent on the close of escrow. We want to make sure to let the seller know that our buyers have canceled. Now, oftentimes I leave this at 2 days. Okay. Sometimes if it's a hot market, I'll shorten it up to 1, but I want some time in there to try to fix the situation so that I can come back to the seller of the property we're purchasing and say, hey, our buyers cancel, but we already have a backup offer in play, and we've accepted that, so we're moving forward. We're just going to ask for a extension of the close of escrow of this property, right? I want to come to them with solutions, so oftentimes I leave that at 2 days. Okay. So that's the cancellation. So just so you know, you're required to let the seller know if they do cancel. If I'm a seller of a property, sometimes, especially if I'm already putting together a counter, I'm going to counter this down to 1 day, because I'm going to be like, hey, I want to know within 24 hours if your buyer cancels. I don't want it 48 hours out. I want to know that this transaction is headed for derailment. Okay, so as a listing agent, I might put 1 there. As a buyer's agent, I'd probably leave it at 2. Backup offers. Any questions about sections 5 or 6? Status of sale of buyer's property or cancellation of buyer's property. Okay. Backup offers and seller right to require buyer to remove contingencies or cancels. This is a really important section. Okay. 7A, backup offers. After acceptance, seller shall have the right to continue to offer the seller's property for sale for backup offers. The parties acknowledge that brokers shall not violate MLS rules requiring accurate property status reporting. That means that the seller can't keep it as active. They have to move it to contingent, but they can move it to contingent show, and they can put in those private remarks, taking backup offers, or sale is contingent on the sale of a property by the buyer. Submit offers. Submit backup offers, right? So we can do that. We can't leave it as active. Okay, so that's 7A. 7B, removal of buyer contingencies and proof of funds. Unless paragraph 7C3 is selected, which we haven't gotten to yet, if the seller accepts a written backup offer and provides buyer a copy of the signed accepted backup offer within the time specified in paragraph 7C1 or 2, seller shall have the right to give written notice to buyer to, in writing, remove this contingency, remove the loan contingency, if any, and provide verification of sufficient funds to close escrow without the sale of buyer's property. Seller may use the bottom of page 2 of this form to comply with the written notice requirement of this paragraph. If buyer fails to complete these actions within 2 days after delivery of such notice, seller may then immediately cancel the agreement in writing. Okay, so we'll go into the time frames here in a minute, but assuming that the sellers have the right to accept a backup offer and provide notice, if they do provide notice to your buyer has to remove the contingency for entering into contract and the sale of buyer's property, whatever's on this form. They have to remove the loan contingency. Why the loan contingency? Because we don't want them canceling based on the fact they don't qualify for the loan because they couldn't sell the property. So we've got to remove not only the sale of the buyer's property, but also the loan contingency. And we have to show proof of funds that the buyer has the ability to close on the purchase without the sale of their property. Okay, those are the 3 parts of this section here for backup offers. If the buyer can't do that or is unwilling to do that, then the seller can cancel on the buyer and move forward with the new buyer. Now, notice here that the seller does have to provide not only notice for the removal of these contingencies and to show that, but they also have to provide a copy of that accepted backup offer. So it should be a residential purchase agreement with a backup offer contingency. Okay, they can't just willy-nilly cancel on our buyers. Okay, so that's B. That's what's the requirement is depending on what gets checked in section C. 7C is what kind of time frame does the seller have to provide that notice? Time to give notice to remove contingencies. Now, this is not all the contingencies. This is not the investigation contingency and the insurance contingency and the review of preliminary title report and review of seller disclosures. This is just contingency for sale of buyer's property, loan contingency, and provide proof of funds. Okay, that's all that is being addressed here in this section. I've seen people say, well, that was all the contingencies. No, it's just the ones right there in 7B. Okay, seller shall have the right to invoke the notice provisions in paragraph 7B. The default is immediate right to notify buyer anytime after acceptance. That means anytime after acceptance, we get an offer that we'd rather move forward with, we can provide this notice and then cancel on the buyer and move forward with this other buyer. Okay, that's the default. I do not like the default. Sellers like the default. I do not like the default. I'm going for either C2 or C3. C2 is delayed right to notify buyer no earlier than the default is 17 days after acceptance. If I'm going to check that box, oftentimes I'm going to match it up with how long does my buyer have to get their property in contract. Okay, so if I put 60 days up there on that section, let's see here, it was section 2A, right? If I put 60 days here, then I'm probably going to come down here and say, hey, delayed right to notify buyer. We want the same 60-day guidance. Or maybe we'll say, hey, we want at least 30 days to try to get their property in contract before you decide to move forward with a backup offer. Okay, so that would be the option C2, delayed right. C3 is my favorite as a buyer's agent, which is the seller has no right to notify buyer. The seller shall not have the right to invoke provisions of 7B during the entire time of the agreement. So, right, so the seller can't move forward with a backup offer and serve me this notice unless I'm in breach of our agreement, unless I haven't gotten it into contract in time, we haven't closed escrow on time, I've failed on inspections, right? Then that would allow them to move forward with a backup offer, serve that notice to perform. But that's my preference. 7C3 is my preference, no notice. But second to that would be C2, where I'm going to ask for some time to get moving on that close of escrow. Because ultimately, once we've got that property in the contract, the seller is much less likely to move forward with a replacement offer at that time. They don't want to start all over with somebody who's unknown. Okay, what questions do you have, if any, regarding section 7? All right, moving right along. That's usually where I get the most questions during contracts is what does this mean? Because oftentimes these are the points that a listing agent's going to counter back on. If we said, hey, no right, then oftentimes we get countered. But, in a buyer's market, they may just leave it at no right to notify buyer. Most agents up until, I don't know, 5 years ago didn't even understand this section, so you could put whatever you wanted there, and they had no idea what it meant. All right, they're smarter now. Removal of, they've watched too many of my videos. No, I don't know. Anyways, 8 is removal of contingencies. This contingency can only be removed in writing, even if buyer removes this contingency, unless buyer also performs all actions pursuant to 7B. Seller retains the right to cancel under paragraph 9. So, right? So even if we remove this contingency, unless buyer says, hey, we're good to go under 7B, that we can, we have sufficient funds to close escrow, whatever, then sellers can still give notice. Okay. And seller retains that right to cancel under paragraph 9. 9 is seller's right to cancel. Seller may cancel this agreement in writing as follows. After first giving buyer a written notice to remove buyer contingencies and provide proof of funds below, if buyer fails to take all actions specified in paragraph 7B. After first giving buyer a notice to perform, if buyer fails to enter into contract for the sale of the buyer's property within the time specified in 2A. After first giving buyer a notice to perform, if buyer fails to close escrow for the sale of the buyer's property within the time specified in paragraph 4, after first giving buyer notice to perform, if buyer fails to deliver escrow evidence within the time specified in 1C or 2B, after first giving buyer notice to perform, if buyer fails to deliver evidence of listing the buyer's property or, as applicable, the submission of buyer's property listing to the MLS within the time specified in 3C. If buyer fails to deliver evidence of removal of contingencies of the sale of the buyer's property as specified in paragraph 5B, or if buyer gives notice to seller of either party's cancellation of the contract for the buyer's property. Those are all the reasons that the seller can cancel just based on this contingency alone. That's not the rest of the purchase agreement. That's just this contingency. Notice here, buyer always has to give a notice to perform. Okay. Or if buyers made that request for, or sellers made that request for, hey, where are we at with the removal of contingencies, and buyers don't provide that, then they can cancel. Or if the buyer's property falls out of escrow, sellers can cancel. Okay, so that's section 9. Buyer's right to cancel. Did we have a question?
Yes, I have never dealt with the notice to perform. How many
Yeah.
days are you provided for a notice to perform in any
The
situation?
default is in the purchase agreement is 2 days for a notice to perform. So as long as that doesn't change, you got the default. If I serve a notice to perform today, which is Thursday, I have 2 days to perform on that notice to perform, which would be Friday and Saturday. But keep in mind that if it falls on a weekend or a holiday, I have until the end of the next business day. So if I got served a notice to perform, if I was a seller and served a buyer notice to perform today, they would have all day tomorrow, which is Friday, all day Saturday to perform. They would actually have all day Monday to perform before the seller could actually cancel on them. But it's a 2-day. So weekends do count. So if you got served a notice to perform on Friday, on Saturday, let's say, you would have Sunday, Monday to perform, and then they could cancel on you end of day. Monday if you don't perform ultimately. So 2 days.
Okay.
Okay. Your buyer right to cancel. Buyer may cancel the agreement in writing if prior to the removal of the buyer's property contingency specified in 1A, B, or C. That's, whether it's just the sale or the sale and close of, or entering into contract or entering into contract and close of escrow. If 1A or B applies, buyer is unable to enter into contract on the buyer's property within the time specified in 2A. If 1A or C applies, either party for the buyer's property gives notice to the other to cancel the contract for the buyer's property. Or 1A or C applies, buyer is unable to close escrow on buyer's property within the time specified in paragraph 4. Those are the reasons a buyer could cancel. So we are locking all the parties into this agreement. Time for performance. Obviously, you still have the other contingencies and stuff in the other contract, which we haven't even said when those are going to start, which we're just going to dive into right now under section 11. So 11 is time for performance of contract obligations and delivery of buyer's deposit. 11A, Contract obligations other than deposit. So this is the time periods in the agreement for inspections, contingencies, covenants, close of escrow, delivery of seller documents, review of seller documents, other obligations, excluding those in this addendum, shall begin. The default is as specified in the agreement. Okay, that means that contract accepted today, we put a 30-day close of escrow on that residential purchase agreement. That time period starts right now. We're doing inspections, we're doing investigation, we're reviewing seller documents, even though our property might not even be in contract. Okay. Normally, we would only leave it at that default if our buyer's property is already in contract. We're already moving forward towards the close of escrow with the buyer's property. Okay. Then, yes, we would leave it defaulted. If the buyer's property is not yet in contract, oftentimes we're going to check this little box right here on 11A, which specifies that instead of, they all start tomorrow, it's going to say, hey, this begins, all the time periods in the contract begin on the day after buyer delivers to seller any of the following: escrow evidence for the buyer's property, or the buyer's election in writing signed by the buyer to begin time periods, or buyer's removal of this contingency for the sale of buyer's property. Okay, so that would be a delayed start to all those time periods. That's usually what we select. If you're not going to select that, you're going to leave it the default. Just make sure you account for time in your close of escrow and stuff if your buyer's property is not already in contract. So if we're asking for 7 days to get the buyer's property in contract and we want a 30-day close of escrow, we may say, hey, we want a 37-day close of escrow. But that's oftentimes why I select this box that, hey, all those other time periods, they're all going to begin once we're in contract. Now I have on my addendum, remember earlier I said that sometimes I do an addendum to this. This is taking a long time, by the way. We're almost at 10 o'clock. I apologize if we go over today. So if we delay, sometimes I do an addendum, and sometimes on that addendum, especially depending on like maybe if there was multiple offers or I'm just wanting to be more appealing, I may say, hey, but my investigations are going to start immediately. Okay, so I may start some things right now and delay other things just so they can see that, hey, my buyer's really serious about getting their property sold and moving forward with this purchase. And if nothing else, at least you're going to end up with inspection reports on this property, right? So something to that effect. So, so sometimes I will specify that other contractual timeframes with reference to COP 11A, the time period for buyer's investigation, which is RPA section 3. L1 or L2 or whatever it is, to begin upon acceptance, right? So I would specify that. So that's A. 11B is the buyer's deposit, right? So the first one was, hey, everything in the residential purchase agreement except for the buyer's deposit. So 11B is buyer's deposit. The default is buyer's deposit shall be delivered to escrow within the time specified in the agreement. 99% of the time, that's what I leave it as. Hey, let's get the buyer's money in escrow. We want to validate this contract. I want the seller note that we're serious. So we're going to get that deposit in escrow. The other option, just like above, is if we check this box here on B, it's within 3 days after buyer delivers to seller any of the following: escrow evidence of the buyer's property, buyer's election in writing signed by the buyer to begin time periods, or buyer's removal of this buyer's property contingency. So that's the selection. Again, so 11A, oftentimes I check that box to delay the time periods, but I leave 11B at the default of it's going to be delivered to escrow basically immediately within 3 days. Okay. Questions about that section there, 10, 11, or any part of this form?
No, I do have a question that has nothing to do with it, but it's about cars or car.
Yeah.
Do you know, like when we send a document for signature and then we want to cancel, how do we cancel the document after it's been sent out for signature?
Oh,
So
yes.
that
Are you using Zip or AuthentiSign, or are you using DocuSign?
whatever comes with car,
With card?
I think
Okay.
it's
Yeah,
AuthentiSign, I
it
think.
is. I'll show you that in a minute. Let me finish this form and then I'll
Okay.
show you that.
Okay.
Perfect. Um, Right, buyer signs here, seller signs here that they've received, read, understand, accepts a copy of this addendum, that they're incorporated and as part of the agreement. So not only do we have to check on our residential purchase agreement that the COP form is going to be included, that it's contingent on the sale of the buyer's property, everybody has to sign this form as well for the contract to be, why is it, oh, I timed out. Why are you, don't time out on me. That's rude. All right, hold on. See if we can reactivate it so it doesn't close out. All right, let's see if that works. Okay, so down here, this bottom section. So buyer signs top section, seller signs top section. Nobody signs the bottom section. Okay, there shouldn't be any signatures on here. The only time there's a signature on here, if the buyer or the seller is giving the buyer a notice to remove contingencies. Okay, so this would be only under this section here, 7 B. So if the seller's giving notice for section 7 that they've got a backup offer in hand and they want to move forward with that, then seller signs this section and gives it back to the buyer. Seller hereby gives notice to buyer to remove the sale of the property contingency, remove the loan contingency and if any, and provide verification of sufficient funds to close escrow without the sale of the buyer's property. If buyer fails to complete these actions within the time specified in 7B, seller may then immediately cancel the agreement in writing. Note this notice to remove buyer contingencies and provide proof of funds is not to be delivered until the time specified in paragraph 7C. Okay, so that's the only time we would use this bottom section is sellers have a backup offer. We want to move forward with that backup offer. We're allowed to by section 7. Then we would provide this as that notice with a copy of that backup offer. Okay. Any other questions regarding the sale of the buyer's property contingency? Okay, I am not going to go over the seller's purchase of replacement property today because it's going to take me another 30, 45 minutes to go through that one. So we will cover that one probably in our next car forms training. I have trained on this form before, so if you need to watch that, you can search for it under our training library or on my YouTube channel. If you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer those questions. I've got a couple minutes, so I'm gonna do 2 things. Number one, I'm gonna answer Adriana's question about how to cancel a signing packet. Number 2 is I'm going to go over supplemental property taxes because I think that's really important and we haven't covered it in a really long time. I don't know that we have a training for it. So Adriana, I'm gonna send this out for signatures. I'm just gonna say, hey, we're gonna create this signature packet just so you can see what that looks like, just so I have one active signing packet sitting around out there for you to see. It's actually pretty simple, but it doesn't make sense in Authentisign what you have to do to cancel a packet. So that's a good question. And also I'm going to plug my computer in because I noticed that I did not plug it into power and I'm getting low. All right. So here we're going to add participants. Oh, let's see here. All right, we're just gonna add a signature. Oh, do not accept. Let's hold on. We're gonna add participants from transaction. Because I hit add myself, then it was asking me to sign right away. So here we go. Let's change this. We're gonna go sign here. All right. All right, so now I have a signing packet in this transaction. It's gonna take me back. Take me back. Almost there. All right, so if I'm in this file folder here, I'm inside of that transaction. So open up your transaction that you want to cancel or modify. You're going to come up here on the gray toolbar to e-sign, which is going to load the copies of any e-sign packets that you've sent out, either through DocuSign or AuthentiSign, just so you know, it'll show both. So it'll show like these are drafts. This one's been sent. So this was the one that was just sent. If there's completed ones, it'll say completed. What we're going to do is we're going to click on the little blue drop down arrow, and we're going to click the reset button. Okay, when we click on the reset, it's going to say, hey, any signed documents will be lost if you proceed. That doesn't mean the packet's going to be lost. It's just going to mean if you had multiple signers and somebody already signed that packet, by hitting the reset, it's erasing any existing signatures. Okay, this is important because by doing reset, you can do two things. Number one, you can cancel that packet, and number two is you can edit it. So it's going to automatically open up the signature page again where we set that up so that I can come in here and edit. I can add participants. I could take participants off. I could add signature blocks that maybe I forgot about, and then I could resend it out. Okay, if I don't want to resend it out because I'm really just wanting to cancel it, when it gets to this page, what we're going to do is we're just going to hit that back button. And I don't care whether it saves or doesn't save because I'm canceling it anyways. So just hit the back button, choose your option there. It's going to take us back. Sometimes it takes me all the way back to a step too far, but that's all right. We'll be patient and see where it takes us. For those that are still using DocuSign, I really do like AuthentiSign. I would say this is the one glitch in the AuthentiSign system is canceling becomes really difficult. I used to live and die by DocuSign, and the AuthentiSign or whatever it was through our Carforms library was really clunky. It wasn't very intuitive, and it was worth the money to pay for DocuSign. At this point, if I was still paying for DocuSign, I would stop. I would go AuthentiSign because it works as well, if not better than DocuSign. So here I'm just going to go back to that e-sign button on the gray toolbar. Just throwing that out there, saving you a couple $100 a year. So now that is showing up as draft. Okay, so I could go in there and edit it. I could resend it. From here, what you can do is we can delete that packet. So if I don't want that anymore, are you sure you want to delete it? Yes. DocuSign gives you the option to void it or delete it, but we can just delete it. So that would be that option there. So just know that that is available. That's how you would delete the packet or how you would go back in and edit it. Now, the one thing that you can do here is if I go into signing details, we'll see if this one allows me. Assuming that there's people in here as signers, from signing details, I can edit the email address. I don't have to go in there and reset it. So if I've typed somebody's information in there incorrectly or something, it would allow me to edit it in that screen, just so you know if it's an active signing packet. So you can fix somebody's email without starting all over. That's how you would do that. So that's how you would, they answer your question, Adriana, of how to delete a packet?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, reset. It doesn't make sense because you're like reset, but where's my delete option? They should change that. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to cover today was supplemental property taxes. Okay, I had a really good conversation with someone last night regarding this, and I just thought it was really good to cover. So we have several disclosures. The purchase agreement talks about it in all the legal jargon. Your statewide buyer and seller advisory talks about supplemental property taxes. There's actually a separate disclosure you could use for your supplemental property taxes. Your natural hazard zone disclosure report, most of those address the supplemental property taxes. And you're like, Amy, what does that mean? Here's the deal. In California, most of our property taxes are based on when the current owner purchase the property. Okay, it's market value at time of purchase. So if your seller or if the seller of the property purchased the property below market value, what is deemed market value by the assessor's office, the county assessor's office, it may not be based on purchase price. It may be based on the market value at time of purchase. I actually purchased a property below market value at one point, and the assessment came in higher than my purchase price. Okay, that's the only reason I know that this actually does happen. I can go through all the things. I've experienced lots of things when it comes to property taxes, but so it's based on market value at time of purchase. It does go up a little bit each year or down a little bit depending on the market and the assessed value. Okay, but that's the property tax basis. Okay, our property taxes run from July 1st through December 31st, and then January 1st through June 30th. We get our bills at the end of the year. Most people are probably getting their bills right about now. If they haven't received them already, they're coming. Okay. They're going to be due in November, late in December, and then due again in like February or March, late in April. Okay. I believe are the time periods. The first installment of your property taxes covers the July 1st to the end of December, and the second installment in your property taxes covers, that second payment covers the first of the year, okay? When we close escrow on a property, there's a prorated property tax amount, okay? Like if we're closing today, which is October 30th, the buyer is going to, oftentimes what happens is property taxes are going to be paid out of the seller's funds at the close of escrow for the next installment, assuming that the bills have been issued. Okay, most of the time they get paid right now. Seller's going to pay the whole portion, and then they're going to get a credit from the buyer. For October 30, if we're closing today, they're going to get a credit from October 31st through December 31st. Okay, they're going to take the total tax bill, divide it by the number of months, 30 days in a month, figure out that, and then multiply it by the number of days left. Okay. That prorated amount that the buyer's paying property taxes on is based on the current owner's property tax rate, which is generally lower than the purchase price. Not always, but generally lower than what we're currently in contract for. Which means that when we close escrow on this property, the buyers take possession of it. The property is going to be what we call reassessed. Okay. The county assessor is going to look at it. They're going to reassess it, usually again based on the purchase price, but market value at time of purchase, which is usually the purchase price. 90% of the time it's the purchase price. Okay. Then what happens, because the buyer's already paid the property taxes, oftentimes both installments get paid, sometimes just one, whatever that might be. So what happens now is that the buyer, because they paid the property taxes from the date that they took possession of it, based on the current assessed value. So when the property gets reassessed after the close of escrow, they're going to get a bill for the difference between what it was previously assessed at and what the new assessed value is and what those property taxes were that should have been paid. Okay, sometimes they get two bills, sometimes they get one bill. Okay, generally speaking, if you close escrow prior to the end of the year, you're going to get two bills for supplemental property taxes. If we close after the first of the year, oftentimes you get one supplemental property tax bill. It comes at the same time, but you get to pay it in two installments versus one. The county used to be really good at it. I don't know what the time frame is right now for this, but they used to get it out to you within a couple months. Okay, we would tell our buyers to look for this. There was a time period where it was taking, I experienced people not get their supplemental property tax bill for almost 2 years. Okay, it was big because they've been paying property taxes based on an old amount. Not only that, but they had an impound account, which meant their lender was paying their taxes and insurance for them. And because it was a lower amount, now their lender, after 1 year of servicing the impound account, said, oh, your property taxes are lower, so we adjust your payment down because we need to collect less taxes. And then they had to adjust it back up because now there's a shortfall in their account. We can get into that on a later date. But that question came up of whose responsibility is it to tell buyers about a supplemental property tax bill? Do the lenders do that? No, ultimately, that's one of those gray areas. It doesn't really fall into anybody's lap. Nobody's truly at fault if the buyers aren't told. There are disclosures that get sent out. Oftentimes at the close of escrow, a good title company will tell the buyers about supplemental property taxes. But I would encourage you not to wait until the close of escrow. Okay, oftentimes a good title company will tell the buyers about the supplemental property tax bill. They'll tell them when to expect it. They will even do the calculations for them of here's what it's going to approximately be and whether they're going to have 2 installments or 1 installment. Okay, a good title company will. That being said, I would highly recommend that anytime your buyer enters into contract for a property, that you tell them what their estimated supplemental property tax bill is going to be. And if you're like, Amy, how do I do that? Well, almost in every single NHD report, there's a page that talks about the supplemental property tax bill and gives you a page to calculate out what that might be. Okay. If you want to cheat, which I highly recommend cheating, Property ID NHD company, so it's one of our NHD suppliers, Property ID, they have a property tax estimator. So if you log into propertyd.com, create a free account, okay? I'll show you why you want to create a free account here in a minute. Then you go to resources. They have a property tax estimator. Magical. Okay, this is going to tell you what the current property taxes are, if there's supplements to or assessments to that property tax, what the county tax rate is, and it's going to break it down for you. If you put in the purchase price and the estimated close of escrow date, it's going to calculate out what those supplemental property tax bills are. So I already have this open and logged in with a property pulled up. I'm not going to show you the address of this property because then my video will get flagged on YouTube and Abby will have to do all sorts of additional editing to get the address out of it, and it's just a mess. So this is an actual property. Okay, it's my actual listing that I have right now. Here's the current assessed value, $319,152. That's what the current taxes are based on. Okay, here is our current tax rate. That's, hey, what is it being taxed on? And then here's the direct assessments to those properties. This could be, these are all kind of like Mellore's. It could be things that got voted in by the voters. It could be for infrastructure, fire departments, schools, park maintenance, right? So those are all the direct assessments. So here we're going to put in the purchase price. So let's say our purchase price is $575,000 and our estimated close of escrow date is, we just entered into contract on this property. Let's pretend. So our close of escrow date is going to be a 30-day close of escrow, which is going to fall on a weekend. Okay. If we put it in contract today, just heads up on this, tomorrow's day 1 of the contract, which is the 31st. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. That puts us on the 29th. Okay. See how that's a Saturday? Our close of escrow actually would fall to Monday because if our day of performance falls on a weekend or a holiday, it rolls to the next business day. So that was a good example. That's why I counted it out for you, just so you could see that. So I'm going to put estimated close of escrow date is going to be on December 1st. Now, we could all agree that we're going to close on Friday, the 29th, instead of rolling to the next Monday, but let's just put it there. Then we're going to hit calculate. Uh-oh, there we go. All right. So here is the, okay, here is the current tax year. Property assessed value, the variable rate, the direct assessments, the purchase price, close of escrow date. That's all the information we put in. Here is our new annual property taxes are going to be $7,595.03. That's what my buyers can expect to pay. Now, I would tell my buyers it's going to be about $7,600. Okay. And I would let them know, I actually print this up and give it to them, have them sign off on it. And I would just tell them this is an approximation just based on the information that we have. They're going to get a supplemental property tax bill, only one, in the amount of $1,448.96. Again, that's going to be approximate. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. That's approximate. So that's what they can expect after the close of escrow. Okay, I like this one because it calculates it all for you. So nhpropertyid.com, their NHD report, you go into resources, tax estimator. If you don't create a free account, then what happens is you just have to put in what the current tax rate is, close escrow date, purchase price. You have to hand key all that information in. If you create an account, then it gives you the ability to look up the address, either by address or by APN. So much better option there. So anyways, there's your supplemental property taxes. Again, I would recommend making sure you implement this as part of your, we just got an accepted offer. Let's kick this out there. Now, if the buyer has a impound account, meaning that when they close escrow on that property, their lender's paying the taxes and insurance for them. They're paying part of a 12th of their taxes and insurance on a monthly basis with their mortgage payment. Then oftentimes, the lender is collecting funds based on the close of escrow and the impound account set up at the close of escrow based on what they're estimating the new tax rate to be. Okay. So oftentimes when the supplemental property tax bill comes due, the lender has enough funds in the escrow account to cover the supplemental property tax bill. Not always. But it's important to let the buyers know that they're going to get this supplemental property tax bill. It's going to say supplemental property taxes. It's not automatically going to be paid by their lender, even if the lender's paying property taxes and insurance as part of their payment. That they're going to need to call their lender, have a conversation with them, let them know that, hey, I just got my supplemental property tax bill for $1,448.96. I wanted to check and see if there's enough funds in my impound account to cover this bill. Okay, the lender might say, yeah, I think there is. We can absolutely do that. Or no, there's not. You need to pay that outside. Okay, usually there's enough funds in there, but not always. It kind of depends on how the lender set up the impound account. And know that if again, I don't know how far behind they are right now on the reassessments in Solano County. At one point, it was over 18 months. So what was happening was the lender takes the money based on 7,600. They divide it by 12. That's what they're taking, factor into the buyer's payment each month to pay towards their property taxes. But every 12 months, okay, the lender assesses the impound account. And they look at it and they say, oh, we only paid $4,500 in property taxes last year and this amount in insurance. And now we have what's considered a surplus in the impound account. They're only allowed to keep so much extra money in that impound account before they start getting in trouble. Okay, they can't keep years and years worth of property taxes in there. So if the supplemental property tax bill hasn't come in, the property hasn't been reassessed, and it's been a while, then the lender is going to say, oh, here's our reassessment based on your impound account. Here's your new payment. And that payment's going to go down. Your buyer's going to be like, oh my gosh, yes, my payment just went from $4,600 to $4,400. This is glorious, amazing. But then what happens is there's not enough money when the property finally gets reassessed, not only to cover the supplemental property tax bill, but to cover the property taxes at all. Okay, so then what happens is the next year, the lender still pays the property taxes. They're not going to squabble over it. But the next year, when they reassess that payment that the buyer's making, they're going to be like, oh, not only should we be taking $600 instead of $400 for your property taxes, but now we have a shortfall in your account because we didn't have enough in there to cover the amount that we paid. And now, not only is it supposed to be $600, but we're going to assess you an extra like $50 a month. So now your payment went back to where it started plus some because we made an error and we need you to finish up and pay up the shortfall for the money that we paid out of your account. So just be unaware of how that works and what that looks like. Always let buyers know ahead of time what their supplemental property tax bill, what to expect, when to expect it, and that they should check with their lender to see if there's funds available. And if their property hasn't been reassessed and they get a notice from their lender that they're changing their payment, that they should reach out to you so you can look at it with them and help walk them through that, because they may want to talk with their lender and say, hey, I know that you want to change this, but here's the problem. The property hasn't been reassessed yet. This is the old tax rate still, so we need you to keep taking the same amount of money. I'm going to keep paying the same amount and earmarking it for that impound account or something to that effect, so that they don't end up with a shortfall and their payment forcibly going up. Any questions? about supplemental property taxes. All right. I hope that was helpful. Let's see if we change this. If we're closing in November, we're going to go November 12th.
Amy, I'm sorry, Amy, I couldn't log on. I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
In regards to that supplemental tax bill and everything, does that take into account the concessions paid? If the seller pays buyer's agent commission.
I'm gonna say it goes off total purchase price because that would be market value. So whether the buyers got money back or agents got paid, I mean, traditionally agents were generally paid by the seller. Anyways, so to the new market, I'm gonna say they're gonna go off just what the total purchase price was.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just playing around with it a little bit. Okay, so here, look. So now I calculated it out to if we weren't closing till February, then we end up with 2 supplemental property tax bills. And because it's dipped into the second period of property taxes. So anyways, there you go. So if you fall into the new year, then you're going to end up with 2 bills and a much higher supplemental property tax amount. So it's better to close at the end of the year than the beginning of the year. So you can let your buyers know that. It's better to close in the fall or winter. We're just going to increase our fall and winter sales. They're going to pay the same property taxes no matter what. But anyways, there you go. All right. I hope that was helpful. If you guys have any other questions, run into problems with this as we have buyers, don't hesitate to reach out to me. But again, propertyid.com, create an account, go into their resources, property tax estimator, great tool. You can print this out. So it's super helpful there. Again, it's also in all of your NHD reports. There's a page where it walks you through how to do the calculations, and it'll give you different rates to multiply it by, depending on when the close of escrow is. It'll show you what the current tax rate is, what the purchase price is. So take time to do that, to communicate that to your buyers, because there is nothing worse than getting hit with a $3,800 supplemental property tax bill and not knowing what it is or that that they should be expecting it. Right. All right. Fabulous. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Any questions or anything before we log off?
Just a quick question. I know you said that if, homeowners get their supplemental tax bill, they could call to see if there's any money there for them to pay it. But if there isn't, do you know of any lenders that would actually take care of that supplemental bill and include it with their escrow and increase their monthly payments after that? Is that such a thing or not really?
Yeah, I mean, some lenders will let you know that, hey, we're not sure there's enough money to cover that, but we can go ahead and pay it on your behalf. Just know that there may be a shortfall in your account, and then we're going to factor it into your future payments when they do the reassessment. Some lenders will go ahead and pay it, even though they know that they're going to kind of anticipate that shortfall. I would personally, I would rather say, hey, buyer, like if you don't have the funds, like just start paying payments to the property tax assessors or set aside some money. You're going to get a late fee there, but like just start setting aside the same amount of money so that you can pay that, in 6 months, even though it's due today type thing, rather than get it factored into their lender's payments if there's not funds there.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, fabulous. We will see you all next week. More than likely next week, because I don't think that was shown. Let's see here. Before I hop off, I know in the chat box, if I can get back over there, Abby did put in the November calendar because we had the dates for the business planning on there, but I can't find it now. Hold on. Business planning will be the second week of November, the 10th and 11th. So next week, we're going to cover some things. We're going to show you how to set up like neighborhood market reports for your existing database, because that's one of those things that we said should be getting emailed out once a month. I'll show you how to set that up in both Berries and in OneSuite next week. So you know how to do that and make sure you have that set up and rolling in to the beginning. Oh, no, there's no class next week because you guys should all be at Summit. Sad. All right. So it'll be on the calendar this month. This month's pretty busy, but 10th and 11th, mark those on your calendar. We are going to have business planning on there, 2-part, 2 days. It'll be fabulous. So mark that on your calendars, and we'll see you all in a couple weeks. Hopefully everyone's going to Summit, and we'll see you when you get back. Talk to you soon.